available to us when we're down into the quick, rapid self-defense mechanisms of the lower brain. Now, there is also a third part of the brain, and that's the middle brain. And this is also a very important part of the brain, because this is the part of the brain where we do playing and connecting. Playing and connecting. And the last thing you want to do when you're anxious is to play. You lose all kinds of playfulness, and you get real serious. And serious is a sign of anxiety. And the problem is, if you can't be more playful with one another, your possibility of bonding or coming together is going to be less. It's in the same part of the brain. If you were to take the midbrain out of an animal's brain system, the animal would no longer frolic or jump, and the animal would no longer herd. It wouldn't have the brains for it. That's why one neurologist calls an alligator, which has a very poorly developed midbrain, the loneliest creature in the world. Okay? There is no connection with other alligators. There are some breeds I've been told that do have a little bit better developed middle brain and do some connection, but for the most part not. So it's so crucial that we have some element of play and humor and relaxation. But of course, when you're anxious, that's very difficult. You're taut, it's tense. You're fighting for your position. And it's difficult to get to that level. But without some playfulness, we won't connect. There are some other ways that are also very helpful for connecting and communing and relating to one another. Besides playing, another one is touching. Okay? And one of the last things we want to do is touch or be touched when we're at odds with somebody. Okay? But touch is important. And one of the ways we do stay in touch is by talking. Not just kinesthetically I'm talking about, but I'm talking about verbally. We can stay in touch by talking. So we need time and opportunity where we can share our viewpoints and our ideas with one another. Another thing that's very important for connecting is what we call mirroring. And mirroring is looking into your face and giving you an honest response back, and you looking into my face and giving me an honest response. If I look into your face and I see pain, disgust, anger, what will I conclude? I obviously give you pain. But if I look into your face and I see delight, brightness, smile, I will say, I give you pleasure. So we're constantly reflecting back to each other whether or not we give each other pain or pleasure. And I'm sure when folks are at odds with one another, what kind of mirroring are they doing? You know? If you're at odds with me, more than likely I'm giving you the feedback that you give me pain. So we do need to find times when we are honest, though, in our reflections with each other, and that we do some honest mirroring with one another. And that's so important because it's so biblical, by the way. There are 400 references to the face of God in the Old Testament. 400. How long, O Lord, will you hide from me, says Isaiah. I need some good mirroring. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. That's mirroring. How often we say, restore unto me once again your presence. Take not away your presence from me. That's all about mirroring. So we need to be honest with each other. We need to go face to face with each other. And isn't that the evangelical counsel? Isn't that the biblical injunction? When you're at odds with one another, it doesn't say get on the telephone or on the parking lot or on your email. It says go face to face and speak the truth in love with one another. I know that's hard. That's hard for every one of us, especially when we feel alienated and angry and anxious with one another. But at some level, we're going to have to come together. And one way we're going to come together, be able to do that with one another. Now, can emotional systems eventually get the anxiety to a level that's manageable, and we can get to the thoughtful part of our brains? That will depend upon your own maturity. That will depend upon your own motivation. What I have found is that when congregations are highly motivated and they use a certain level of maturity, they're able to get to some of the solutions we're talking about. Now, I want to talk about another part of that maturity in the Bowen systems theory. Bowen talked about the differentiation of self. It's a very technical phrase, but it has a very important meaning. Bowen borrowed the word differentiation from biology. When a cell differentiates, a cell is mature. A stem cell, one that hasn't differentiated, is an immature cell. But once the cell differentiates, becomes a muscle cell or a liver cell or a heart cell, it's said to have been differentiated. So differentiation of self means maturity. And what it means is you and I become mature people when we're able to do three things. When we're able to define ourselves to one another based on our principles, rather than just attacking or defining the other person, because usually when we're anxious, I have difficulty defining who I am, but I have a lot of ease in defining who you are. Second part is that I regulate my anxiety. I don't allow it to be the determining factor of my behavior. And that's difficult. Usually when there's anxiety going on in a congregation, I just let the anxiety fly rather than manage it, regulate it. And by the way, I think there's some spiritual things there. Isn't one of the fruits of the Spirit self-control? Isn't there something about the spiritual life where I have some capacity to take this anxiety in my life and to modify it or regulate it, not allow it to determine who I am? And then thirdly, when you differentiate well, you stay connected to others. Now that's hard, because if you oppose me and I oppose you, the last thing we want to do is go to a party together. Okay? The last thing we want to do is sit down and face each other. But it's so important that we do stay connected. Because here's the problem. Those who are less mature or less differentiated tend to go to extreme behaviors. And what are those extremes? The one extreme is what we call fusion. In fusion, two people come together and you can't tell the difference between one and the other. So in fusion, I may give in to you so we don't have any differences anymore. Or you give in to me so that we can be like this. But in any healthy relationship, you don't have to give up who you are as a self, nor do other people ask you to give up yourself. Ideally, you could both be selves in and of yourself and still stay connected. But in fusion, you give up self. So romantic love is a form of fusion. You know, romantic love is just, it's a form of insanity. It's illusion. So I used to say to myself when I did premarital counseling, I'm dealing with two psychotics. They're just not using the thinking brain. It's a little lower brain stuff. And in fusion, we just get too tight to each other. Now, what that happens in a congregation is sometimes I had difficulty telling you that I think some of your behavior is inappropriate. I won't do that if I'm fused with you. I'll just be silent. I won't say anything about it. I'll go along with it. Or in fusion, we really won't talk about the differences we have, because if we talk about the differences, it's going to create more anxiety, and when we create more anxiety, we already got problems. Okay? So we make believe we don't have any differences, and yet we do. And you'll always remember the paradigm that we have in Jesus' life. When he heals the Gerasene demoniac, Mark 5, he says to the demons, "Tell me your name." You cannot disable the demonic. You cannot disable the inappropriate until you name it. And that's hard. That's not going to happen when people get too tight and close and fused. And then the other extreme is cutoff. In cutoff, I don't want anything to do with you. But the problem is with people who are emotionally cut off, get their identity over against the other person. So in other words, what I'll do is I'll give you a negative identity, and by giving you a negative identity, what do I get? A positive one. And when I'm emotionally cut off from people, I usually tend to be very dogmatic, opinionated, and too sure of my own rightness. And therefore, I have difficulty connecting with you. Because I'm right. You know? It's your way or Yahweh's. I have the truth. Now, these are just natural dynamics of human interactions. We will always influence each other's behaviors and be influenced by other people's behavior. That's what happens in an emotional system. All right, so this emotional system right now has a higher degree of anxiety, and there are some pretty visible differences that go on. We know that anxiety is going to be aroused by different kinds of triggers, and they've been going on in this system. That's not abnormal. That's normal. The key will be your response. But of course, you could stay in the reactive mode. But then you won't be as thoughtful. And you won't be as creative in terms of what we could do or what we could be. Now, there'll be no magic to this process, because there'll always be some degree of anxiety and there'll always be some degree of reactivity among all of us. And some of us will be hurt, and some will have hard feelings, some will be disappointed, and so forth. That'll be there. That's, again, quite natural. But I know this, in my experience with over 180 congregations, that when people do become more responsive and less reactive, they make some progress with the problem at hand. But when you're more reactive and you stay in a reactive mode, you don't make progress, you regress. Things get worse. They may go underground even, but eventually they're going to come back up and bite you because they're very intense. They're just not being recognized at the moment. So one of the reasons you have me here as your consultant during this time is to help you not waste your suffering, so that the angst and the anguish of this moment can be put to some use. It can become a motivator for you rather than a paralyzer, so that this can be a moment of learning for you all, and you can make some more appropriate decisions. Now, I remember somebody asking me, what is my rate of success in doing this process? And of course, an answer would be dependent upon what is your criteria for success. If at one level, the criterion would be anxiety is leveled to a point where you can be more thoughtful, I would say my rate of success is pretty high. That happens. But if the rate of success depends on, are people able to stay at that level, or do they have more regression, I can't answer that. The key is not me. The key is your level of maturity and motivation. What responses you will make to the situation. How you will take a look at this and begin to address it. Now, is there a spiritual dimension to this? Isn't conflict a sign of the presence of Satan? Isn't conflict a sign that we don't believe? Isn't tension a sign of we're not loving? Friends, we're human beings and we live in a broken world, and we know we're all sinners. And my sin will affect yours and your sin will affect mine. Remember the scripture, the sins of the fathers are visited upon the children of the third and fourth generation. Okay? What might happen here may affect your congregation 10 years down the line, just as something that happened 10 years ago could have only still be affecting you right now. That's just the way we look at things in terms of a system. But at the same time, we can also use the resources that we have as Christian people. And those resources include speaking the truth in love, naming the demon, and realizing that God is in the midst of this and we're not alone. And we have resources of forgiveness. We have resources of prayer. We have resources of our mutual conversation and consolation of one another, we're not powerless. But again, the more we allow the reactive side to prevail, the less possibility we're going to use our spiritual resources. That's the key. So regulating our anxiety, each of us has to take responsibility for it. Because what I'm talking about is maturity has less to do with how do I get you to function so I don't feel so bad. It gets more to do about how am I going to function in relationship to you, irregardless of whether you agree with me or you don't agree with me. Imagine going to your spouse and saying, I could be happy in this marriage if you would change. I don't think you'd say that. If you did, lots of luck. But on the other hand, that's saying you're responsible for what's going on here. So if you were to say to your fellow parishioner, I would be happy in this parish if you didn't have this idea, or I could be happy in this parish if you didn't take this position, it's the same thing. What is your position? And where are you? And can you hear what some people are saying? And are you willing to also testify to others what you believe? Now, during these times, you may hear some information that you can't believe. It just creates disbelief. And you just have this dissonance in your head. It can't be. All I want to say is be sure you listen carefully, because there are people out there that may have information that you do not have. And they have it because they've been working closer to the situation or have been closer to what's been going on. Be sure you listen to these people carefully. And if people bring up information to you that it's hard for you to believe, don't immediately demonize these people. Because these may be people who you really in the past have seen as having good character, honesty, integrity, and they haven't lost that in the moment. But they have seen some things that you may have not seen, and they are telling you about them and saying we have to make some adjustments, we have to make some changes. The congregation is an emotional system. Emotional processes occur here as they do in any other system. Okay? We're going to be affected by our own humanness. But my experience in working with churches is that they are a little different. They also have resources out there that other organizations do not have. And I hope that you at some level will manage the anxiety in your life so those strengths and resources can be put to use so that this congregation once again is back into its mission and ministry. Thank you for attending it.